Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My guests today are Todd and Junah, also known as Tugboat Captain and Lucky on our Discord server. They are two airsofters from South Carolina in the United States. Todd has been a member of the Storm Riders community for a few years now, and he's been playing Airsoft in South Carolina for his entire career since 2019. He and Junah are on the same team, and he's even refereed a few of the events that Junah has been in charge of. As for Junah, he's been playing for over 8 years, and he's been an admin or a host of Airsoft events for at least the last 4, including some Line Claws Milsim events like Richland Siege, Southern Comfort, and a few others. Both guys, though, are part of a regional airsoft group called Airsoft of South Carolina, or AOSC, which is going to be the main focus of today's episode. As we've talked about before on the podcast a few times, Airsoft looks different all around the world, and the Discord server has really brought that in pretty sharp relief for me and probably a few others. And what's normal or, like old hat in one place might be totally unheard of or even unacceptable in another area. And I'm not just talking about like field velocity limits or pyro or gameplay rules or stuff like that. How Airsoft games are actually organized and how Airsoft communities are organized and how games are played can vary very widely. And so Airsoft of South Carolina has a really interesting approach that I hadn't heard of before. So I jumped on the opportunity to have both Todd and Junah on to talk about it in the hopes that, well, firstly, it might be interesting to you guys listening, but more than that, it might inspire some of you who want to adopt a similar approach in your area, wherever that might be in the world. So to listen and to take heed to what they're suggesting and how it works for them and maybe apply it where you live. So guys, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having us. It's so good to be on the podcast finally. Listen to so many episodes. I was like, hey, let's take a chance and talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad to have both of you here. Before we get into the meat of the episode, like, how hot is it in South Carolina right now? Like, are you guys taking a break for the summer?
So we're not taking a break, but it's pretty bad. We post weekly warnings to anybody who's thinking about playing on the weekend. Just every Monday, every Tuesday, start hydrating, keep hydrating, drink water constantly because, yeah, it's getting up to high 90s. That's like mid 30s Celsius. But it's pretty tough. This weekend, we're switching to a evening-night game scenario just because we're trying to beat the heat.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, and I'm thinking like Saturday's going to be hot. Like tomorrow's going to be hot for us, and it's like 25 degrees. So that's like, I don't know, 70 something or 80. So
yeah,
wow.
Not quite the same range.
Yeah, it was 99 here the other day, and in the shade it's fine, but when you put on any sort of gear and do any sort of movement, yeah, you can overheat pretty quick, and it's certainly something I try to avoid. I'm going to play a couple of times in the summer. It's just I've tried it my first couple of years. I did it, and I was like, nope, this is too much. I'd rather just wait and do practices and skirmishes with some friends, but I'll wait until September or October come around.
Yeah, and I mean, Junah, I really like what you said, like telling your community, like, guys, it's Tuesday, it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Like, you guys should be hydrating now because, if you're hydrating the night before the game, like,
it's too late.
That's not going to do a whole lot for you, put it that way.
No.
So, I mean, yeah, and that's a completely different reality that hopefully I will experience someday. Not like the overheating part, but just the playing in that level of heat. I mean, but yeah, certainly not something we experience up here. So let's get into it. So Airsoft of South Carolina. Can you talk a little bit about how that is different from what you might expect in terms of your typical local Airsoft club? And like, how did it come into existence for you guys?
So I think I'm personally not super familiar with other state organizations because immediately around us is North Carolina and Georgia. The North Carolina Airsoft organization was around when we founded, but as far as I'm aware, it's essentially dissolved. Georgia has a large enough field presence that they don't need a statewide organization. So I don't have a lot of experience with other statewide organizations. But the way it came into existence is the precursor was the SCAA, South Carolina Airsoft Association, and essentially they were very disorganized. They had a rule set, but they didn't really enforce it, and it wasn't fulfilling, players' needs, players' wants for how they want to play and when they wanted to play. They had a very inconsistent schedule. And so a group of our original admin team came together and wrote a charter to create the organization and kind of step into those shoes that SCAA wasn't filling.
Gotcha. And so, and I'll come back to that in a second. But so, Todd, from your perspective, you're coming into Airsoft after AOSC has been created. So, like, you're coming into it and you're discovering it. I'm not really quite familiar 100% with your background discovering Airsoft. But did you discover AOSC first and then start playing Airsoft, or did you discover Airsoft through like a store or a local field? How did that work out for you?
So I started with my son playing indoors at a local field, and I was excited to play outdoors because the indoor field was relatively small, and a couple people said, look up AOSC. And I said, what's that? That weird combination of letters. How do I spell that? And eventually found the Facebook group. And shortly after that, this was early 2019, they were already moving over to the Discord. We were relatively close to then. And so I already had Discord, and I jumped in the group and been there since. It was great to have a consistent message about rules and uniforms and field limits and just everything across the different fields that I could play at. It made a level of stability and consistency that was really nice to have as a new player. I knew what to expect. I didn't have to memorize different ideas and suggestions. And when I went to a different field that we normally play at, but it was a game outside of AOSC, and they had different rules for this thing called bunker tag. I thought, what is this and how does it work? And the first couple of times it was used against me in quite a terrible way. I hated it. Mm-hmm. And then I learned how to work it, but it was just outside of the rule set that I had had for the last 18 months or 24 months. And so it was different. And so I can appreciate having that stability and consistency across the rule set. And if other communities don't have this, it would be awesome to have that, at least a base set of, these are our 20 rules that we want to use. And, a strong team lead, ask the fields, hey, can we use these rules? And then take them to the next field. Can we use these rules? And hopefully develop that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting, right? So I guess my question, to come back to Junah, and like at the start of this, like you mentioned, like there was a previous organization, rules weren't consistently enforced, etc. So why was it important for your community at that time to create this organization that would create these rule sets and stuff? I guess my question is more around, what is the need that this was filling for you guys that wasn't actually being met by either the organization that was already in place or by the individual fields themselves?
Yeah, so like I said before, the SCAA was the precursor, and they had a rule set, but it changed depending on what field they were playing at, and they didn't have a consistent schedule. So essentially, you didn't know when you were going to play, and when you did, you didn't know which rule set you were going to use, and the people running the games weren't the same people every time, so you couldn't get to know your admin staff, and there's a lot of disorganization that ended up prompting the original staff to create the charter that became the AOSC.
So what would you say is the AOSC's mission overall? Like, if I'm an airsofter in South Carolina, what does AOSC do for me?
The AOSC establishes a consistent baseline with rules, a schedule, and a community. So you can always know when your next game's going to be. You can always know what the rule set's going to be there, and you've always got people to play with. Because I mean, we used to do it on forums before Facebook was a thing, and then after Facebook
Hmm.
was a thing, then became Discord. But across all of those various forms of media, you always had a consistent community that you could ask, questions. You could, you know, comment on how something was run, throw ideas out there, and that's really what that serves, is that cohesive environment.
And so, based on what I'm hearing and what you mentioned, Todd, just before, this rule set that you're providing is sort of agnostic of the field that you're playing at. You are tied to you're not tied to any particular field, which I guess is the part that, to me, when I'm thinking about this, makes it sound unique. Like when I think about our community, like we have a Facebook group before we played at the local field. We played in the woods at Redcliffe. We did, but we that's the only place that we played. Like we were just a player organization. But what it sounds like you've established here is more of an organization that has maybe not like on paper partnerships, or maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have agreements essentially in place with the different fields to provide that consistent experience for your player base. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there are other fields that we don't directly partner with that have slightly different rules, but essentially, as far as I'm aware, all but one field in South Carolina uses some form of our modified rule set. So there is a baseline consistency no matter what. Yeah.
Right. And I guess another thing you mentioned, and Todd, you sort of talked about this too, when you're going to, if you're a player going to an AOSC game, you sort of, you know what you're in for. Is that my understanding correct there?
Yeah, 100%. I know that I can wear green tops and bottoms, and I know that I'm going to be on Team Alpha, and I can dress my kid in the same outfit, and I can talk to Junah. Hey, Junah, wear green, and I know we'll be on the same team. And I know that my neighbor that's showing up in a hoodie and jeans, he may or may not be on my team. And I tell him that on the way in. Hey, bud, you might be on the other team and I might shoot you a lot. And he's okay with that. And that gives him the opportunity to shoot me. But we don't know going in if we're going to work together or work against each other.
Do you tell
But
him to
that's the
wear jeans
rules.
and a hoodie specifically so you can shoot him? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, occasionally we wear balancer. Like we'll show up in balancer just because we know, okay, this field is pretty heavy on
Hmm.
green. Most players
Gotcha.
show up wearing green, and I don't want to. I want to be able to balance that. I feel like I'm a 7 out of 10 player, and I want to be able to influence the game in a positive way. So I'm going to show up in a balancer kit to help out whichever side needs it for the numbers.
Hmm.
And later,
That
if it's imbalanced, the admin can say, hey, you two balancers, come over to the other side at lunch. After lunch, come over here and we're going to play the other direction.
yeah.
I can
And
think
go
I
ahead.
can think of a time when I specifically changed uniforms at lunch because the game was just so unbalanced, and we wanted to join the other side, and so I took off my greens and put on my tans, and after 10 minutes of being on the field, people recognized me and they're like, "Hey, why are you changed?" And I said, "Well, because I wanted to shoot you and I wanted to change sides." And you shoot them, and that's that.
Yeah, yeah, legit. And I think, you're describing a really easy situation as well for admin to keep track of how, are we balanced or are we not? Because visually you can just look and say, oh wow, that's a lot of green, or oh wow, that's a lot of tan, or whatever, and you can switch it up easily. And I want to talk about sort of the game running a little bit after, but I'm curious about when you think about, like, when you talk, excuse me, about the game rules and all this kind of stuff. How did you decide on those game rules, and how is AOSC sort of organized? Like, is it and I don't know the terms for this if they're the same in America as they are in Canada, but we call them like not for profit organization or non-profit organizations that are like community organizations. Basically, is that how you're set up? Is there like a board of directors? Is it that formal, or is it more of a like an agreement between players?
So, technically speaking, it is that formal. However, we are not a registered organization because we are essentially a nonprofit. We don't
Okay.
make any money off of running the games. Any money we do make off the top of the field fee is paying for our gas, props we put into games, or we just put
Hmm.
it towards future games when we're going for like, bigger scale, more props, stuff like that. Yes, the way it is organized, originally back in 2009, we made a charter. It is a extremely legal document. um, do not recommend reading it. It is very dry, but we have bylaws and everything. But essentially,
Oh
how
wow.
it's
Okay.
run is a constitutional oligarchy, really, is what it is, because we wanted, the feeling of democracy, but we also need to have um, immediate resolution to some conflicts. So
Hmm.
we have something that's not a true democracy or a republic, but it's it's very I want to say it's very sturdy, the way it's organized, but legally it's not a registered organization.
Okay. And so, and, I mean, that makes sense to me. Like, I think in, if I look at sort of how our community has operated for a while, we always take we always will listen to everybody's opinion, but there's a difference between listening to everybody's opinion and every opinion mattering the same level. At some point someone has to make a decision, and
Right.
who's going to wear that decision. For us, it happened to be, well, the people who'd been around the longest, or whatever. So it sounds like you have that a bit more formalized, which is not a bad
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
um, but how do you look at, like, so for example, if we look at your rule set, which we can talk about after, but like, are do you have periods of time where you look at the rules together and you'll say, like, is this still current, is this still good, do we need to make changes? Is that a thing that you do as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of the time, like the most recent example I can think of is we changed our grenade rules. So originally, it was just detonation inside of a building killed everyone in that room, and then
Hmm.
outside of that, a BB would have had to make contact with you. But you get in these situations where somebody's throwing a grenade that only launches BBs out of one side, or maybe it's technically just a sound distracted device and they're making a really good throw. It lands less than a foot away from the person it goes off, but they're in the woods and technically that person doesn't have to call it. Now, good
Hmm.
sportsmanship says that they would call it, but you know, we we want to like encourage that behavior, and we ended up having the community say, hey, we would prefer if it was just a 10-foot radius, regardless of whether or not it's outside. And so we ended up changing our rule
Right.
set to include that distinction.
Yeah, and that seems like a pretty reasonable approach. And can anybody, like, so Todd, like, have you observed rules that you're like, I like this rule, I think it should be changed? And do you have a venue where you can? I mean, obviously you're friends with Juno, so that sort of simplifies that
Yeah,
process
there
a
you go.
little tiny bit. But like, what does that look like for you as a player?
For me as a player, one of the rule changes, I see them and I read the grenade rule change, and I'm totally okay with that. I don't have any personal issue with any of the rules. I can think back to when COVID was a thing and you couldn't get within 10 feet of people, but to med people, to revive them in the game, you have to physically touch them. So,
Hmm.
how does that work? Well, somebody developed a squirt gun rule, and you had to squirt somebody with a water gun like 10 times to get them revived.
That was fun.
And there's little things that being an organization that can adapt and have an cue the Star Wars music, an emperor to say this is what we're going to do.
Hmm.
That I think is a really great thing, and it's consistent across the different fields. And for me, that is a huge benefit to the whole program.
And so I'm curious now, because you mentioned the different fields, and it's a pretty good segue. Like, how did you approach the local fields to basically say, like, hey, we have this rule set, we would like to use it at your field? Or how did you develop those partnerships or relationships with the fields, or did they already exist in the first place?
So the easy answer is that we're older than all of them.
Okay.
So um, essentially, either about half of our fields are locations that we are the exclusive party that runs events there. They are player built. It is not a business. We simply have a partnership agreement with the landowner to allow access. And so the only games that are hosted there are our games. We have a couple of
Hmm.
paintball fields where they don't do airsoft. They just do paintball. So, every however often they're on the schedule, we're the only ones running an airsoft game there. The other fields, like I said, either we've been around longer than them, where they grew up with our rule set, and so that's what they use, or they came on later and they they went looking for a rule set. The first one they found was ours, and they either modify it slightly and go with it, or they use like a couple base factors that everybody would be familiar with. Anytime we run a game that's got the AOSC logo on it, it's going to use our rule set in entirety.
Right. And so have you had to approach fields to ask them? It's like, hey, we would like to use your rule set, or to even recommend that they use your rule set because it's more um, fulsome, let's call it, than perhaps what they had been using before.
Yes, a couple of times, like there had been new fields where we're excited for them to come onto the scene, and we may not have room for them on the schedule that year, but in the future we're looking forward to adding them on the schedule, potentially. And we say, hey, I see you're using like A, C, and D of our rule set. Um, we recommend using B, and if you know you don't want to, that's fine. But if potentially you want to get on the schedule and use our full rule set, as long as it's not going against their insurance policy, we're always going to basically we're going to end up using our full rule set at the games that we host at those locations.
Gotcha. So just to recap overall, and then we're going to move on now to the fun stuff, or the more fun stuff. I like talking about rules, but I'm a nerd. I get it. So like whatever. But like, so you have this organization which basically will play the same type of rules, or the same rules with the similar types of games at various fields, regardless of, oh, well, we're playing at this field, so they have these rules. Like, no, if it's an AOSC game, these are the rules that we're going to play. This is the types of games that we play, which provides the players who are members or like airsofters in South Carolina that consistent experience no matter where they're going. They know what to expect. You don't have weird curveballs like Todd was talking about earlier, where it's like, oh, they've got this special rule and you have no idea what it is, and you get
Right.
totally murked, and then you're like, oh my God, what's going on? And you have to adapt. So as opposed to, I think, what I can't obviously speak for the United States, but what I can speak for in Canada, which is that you play airsoft and you go to a field and those are the rules that you play. And if you go to another field, you have to adapt to that field. But there is no, like, even as we were working on Bill C-21 and stuff, we created regional organizations just to deal with the politics of that. But those organizations don't run and create games. Although by the sounds of it, that's basically what you've set up, not the politics side, but an organization of players in that regions that create games that are tailored to that regions with a rule set that is acceptable, aside from the oligarchs who run the organization, but it is acceptable to most of the players. Most players go like, yeah, these rules make sense. I'm cool with them. And certainly seems to be what Todd, you're intimating as well, is that they're, you don't have any objection to them. They're totally reasonable. So you have that set up, which is pretty cool. Now, I think the next bit of this is, so I'm a player. What am I getting from AOSC in terms of games? So like my first question is like, do you create a schedule that shows like what games are going to be when, or even more granular than that? Like, these are the types of games that we're going to be playing at certain times or certain fields?
So the way our schedule works is we play every other weekend. It's
Hmm.
always on Saturday unless we have a multi-day game. But yes, we outline when we're going to have a special game. Um, a It might just be like a an operation style where it's continuous gameplay. There's breaks for lunch, breaks for dinner. There's just a night game portion, or we'll outline that this is going to be a 24-hour milsim game, hardcore nonstop for 24-hour game. But generally, the meat and cheese of our schedule is skirmish days, and those are just anybody can come play. Easy rules. There's the requirement is that you show up and have fun, and it's just whatever the admin that's running the game has set up for the day. Most of the time, it's just mildly objective based games that run for like 30 minutes to an hour, and then you switch sides or swap game modes, something like that.
Gotcha. And so, Todd, from your perspective, like, what are you looking forward to when you're looking to that schedule? Like, what is the stuff that you're waiting to hit the schedule? Be like, oh yeah, I got to hit that.
Well, what I like about the schedule is that the fields rotate through, and I know, okay, I like playing at XYZ field, and I know, okay, I can put it on. The schedule comes out 6 months or a year in advance, and I can go ahead and book that out on my calendar. So my other life events, I can sort of plan around it and know,
Hmm.
okay, these are the ones I kind of want to hit, and I can make a goal of, all right, I want to play 10 or 12 games a year, kind of like you did last year, and I can outline them and say, okay, then if I want to get that, that means I need to make this game on this weekend. And oh, I don't want to play at that field. I want to play at this one. Well, that means I'm busy this month, so I need to make a trip. And there's a couple of fields that are a couple hours away, 2.5 to 3 hour drive for me. Well, I know I want to play that field at least once
Hmm.
during the year. So I know, okay, if I can't make that March game and I don't want to play in the summer, that means when that field comes up in September, October, I'm going. And it's a 3 hour drive each way. Well,
Hmm.
I'm getting my butt up and going because I want to play that field specifically. And that's what I like about it is that I can plan when I want to play. Um,
Right.
there's no when you get there, it's a hodgepodge of games. And if I know I want to play a certain game mode and I happen to know the admin that's running the game, I can make suggestions. If they don't have anything concrete or set, hey, can we play this? And usually they're like,
Right.
well, I've got something going on this game, next game, sure, let's do it. And that local community of knowing the admins, because I've been around 4 years now. That's not brand new, but it's still not,
Hmm.
8 years like Junah or 10 or 15 years like some of the other guys. So, but it's been around enough to where I know who's running the games and I can say, can we do this? Or this isn't working for me. Um, I'm considering sitting out the next game because of XYZ, and they'll
Hmm.
listen and, um, plan and coordinate around that. So, the local refs, not the local refs, but knowing the admins, the consistency there, and the schedule consistency, and knowing when I can play are my two biggest attributes to the scheduling part of the game.
Yeah, and this isn't part of the AOSC conversation. But I'm just curious, like, what does a field have to make you drive 3 hours to play there?
Oh, well, actually, there are two of the bigger fields in the state. I live in the upstate of South Carolina, and Junah happens to live in the Midlands. There's more fields up here, but I don't want to say better, but the bigger fields are in the middle part of the state. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's just that's how far it is to go. Um,
Yeah, fair enough.
and they're just great to play at.
So, have you found, and I mean, either of you, I mean, can feel this question, but are there certain types of games or formats that overall your community seems to prefer? Like, I know airsofters love like skirmishes and just getting out there and just trying a bunch of stuff or whatever, but what are the things that the community, and I mean Todd yourself and Junah as players, like what are the ones that you look forward to the most? Like what are the things that are really stand out? Maybe even like, for lack of a better term, flagship events that AOSC runs.
I'll let
Oh,
Todd
for me,
answer
it's
that one
the
first, and I'll
Yeah, for me, there's two of them. One is the anniversary game that comes up every year. This year it's gonna be it's at Blue Hole again, right? Um,
Yep.
and that's a great field to play at. I really like it. It's large, diverse terrain, from swamp to plains to hills, lots of pines, lots of obstacles or objective areas, if you will. And it's just a great field to play at. So that's one of the things, and it usually draws a lot of players. That's kind of one of the other cool things is that the game pretty consistently has 100 or more players at it, which at a big field, lots of players make for a good game. And there's other games that we have at Christmas where Junah dresses up like Santa, and we all try and shoot Santa and his elves. And he runs. I've seen him run around with a golden AK before, and just theme games that are fun as well. From cops and robbers to cowboys and Indians to there was a midget game a couple years ago. There's all sorts of crazy stuff that the theme games that just kind of shake it up from the standard regular skirmish stuff.
Yeah. And Junah, what about from your perspective? Like, what's the flagship? I mean, dressing up as Santa, now I get the beard, right? It's part of your cosplay. So
Yeah,
fair play.
Yeah.
But what's some of the flagship stuff for you?
So, really, my favorite events are put on by one of our other admin staff. There are 24-hour games, and I know certain organizations that run Milsim events like to say that they're the only Milsim event, but we have a very similar, very hardcore rule set for those 24-hour games, and it is an experience. One of my top 5 airsoft moments is waking up at 4 a.m. into a gunfight that basically shouldn't have happened. But there's some great experiences at those events. But just for standard events, skirmish games, stuff like that, really our community has fun with. And I highly recommend these objectives because they are the cheapest, easiest, funnest thing I've ever found. They make on Amazon, you can get chess timers for $15. You can paint one side one color, one side the other color, and you're just flipping it back and forth on points. You get 5, 6 of them and put them out around the field and play kind of like a battlefield style conquest, see how long each team can have on their timers before the end of the game. And that's pretty popular.
Yeah, that's the chess timer is something we've been looking into as well, because it's just a really easy way to King of the, there's so much you can do. It's so versatile, whether it's flags or King of the Hill or domination or whatever you want to call it. I just want to come back to the 24-hour Milsim event, because what you said is definitely true. This sounds more like Milsim in the East, let's call it. But yeah, or maybe Southeast, I guess.
Yeah.
But regardless, what I was going to say about the 24-hour Milsim, and I think there's an interesting aspect too, is that having a hardcore 24 Milsim is not something, in my opinion, and you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong here, that just someone can just walk off the street and go into. Right?
Todd has intimate experience with that.
Right? Unless you start the street that you happen to be walking off of is I just came back from deployment or whatever. That's whatever. But so there's an opportunity. There appears to be an opportunity here as an organization that is community driven to say, okay, this is the kind of game that we want to play, but also this is how we want to. And I'm going to use corporate speak because it's the only word that sort of comes to my mind. This is how we're going to upskill some of our players to be able to attend and actively participate in a way that is fun and engaging for them. Although 4 a.m. gunfight doesn't sound like fun to me, but regardless, but there's an opportunity there for you guys to act almost like mentors to younger players, or newer players, I should say, to get them into that scene. So how has that shaped out? I know, Todd, you probably have a story that you want to share about this too.
Oh, well, I've played several long duration games, but I have not made it to one of the 24-hour games. I always chicken out when they come up because I just feel like I'm not ready. I'm a mid-40s guy, and I've been camping a lot. and I've been playing Airsoft for quite a bit for a couple of years now. But the thought of putting those two together doesn't seem very much fun to me. Like, I want to do one or the other. When I'm camping, I want to relax and hang out. And when I'm playing Airsoft, I want to be, serious at times, but also cut up and hang out. But I want to be in that mode. But trying to put the two of them together and eating cold food and sleeping on the field, maybe I'm just too old and I like cushy things, but I just can't imagine trying to sleep in a foxhole at these fields. It just isn't super appealing to me. I know I need to do it because I want to have that experience. I've heard plenty of horror stories, if you will, of great times where somebody gets kidnapped, but then someone frees him and breaks him out, and just these great battles and gunfights, and baby music at 3 a.m. over a speaker, just all sorts of crazy stuff. I want to experience those things, but also I'm old and I like my sleep, dude. I don't know about playing 24 hours straight. That's a lot.
Todd,
but I think you mentioned something interesting. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Junah. I just wanted to just touch on this last bit that you're saying, is that you said, like, I've played a lot of Airsoft, but I don't feel like I'm ready, is what you said. And like, it's interesting to me because it's like, you know enough about Airsoft now to know that if you were just to jump over, that probably would not be necessarily a great experience right for you, as opposed to people who I've seen like started playing Airsoft this year who are like, oh, I want to do a 48-hour event. And I'm like, you don't know what that actually entails. I don't know what that actually entails, and I wouldn't want to do it. So like, I think there's a piece of that. Sorry, Junah, you were going to say something.
I might be misremembering, but Todd, wasn't like one of your first games going to be Vietnam Patrol at SQ?
It was that summer game. I thought it was VP, but it was just a summer game. My very first game was at SQ's, and it was a July 15th game. It reached 100 that day, heat index well over 100, so 35 Celsius, 38 was some crazy number.
Mm-hmm.
And walking up that hill was terrible. I have since I've gotten the patch that say I survived the hill, and it's just one where I didn't know what I was getting into. I did manage to bring chairs and a pop-up tent and enough space to kind of set up and chill out. And I left the field at least 30 minutes before lunch break because I was toast. And that had only been 2+ hours in the morning session. And I was toast, and I was like, I got to stop. And I took an extra 30-minute lunch. And I think I was 30 minutes late getting to the field after lunch. Did the best I could in the afternoon, maybe got 2 more hours in. So 4 hours, but at 4 hours of play at 100-degree temperatures is a lot. Like, it's exhausting. Even though you're in the shade, there's not much air blowing around down there, and you're wearing layers of gear. It was rough. I can't imagine doing. Is VP in August?
No, so we typically try to do VP in May or June for that authentic heat stroke experience.
Exactly.
But no, so I think originally I thought that your first game was Vietnam Patrol, and I couldn't believe that you still wanted to play Airsoft, because that particular Vietnam Patrol, the year you started, it got up to 100 degrees in the afternoon, and then proceeded to rain for 2 days straight. Very authentic, but no. So Vietnam Patrol used to be a 52-hour event, and we've since cut it down to 24 simply because we want players to not die.
Yes.
Yeah, and, like there's. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but like I think for the vast majority of airsofters, like 24 hours or 36-hour milsim is probably very quite sufficient to get the experience that you're looking for. And especially when you're starting to talk about like high temperatures, high humidities, like all this kind of stuff, there's a lot of risk associated with that you really don't need to undertake unless you're really, really crazy about it, which, I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to be me, but like I think about like some road races that they do, like the Badwater 100 they do in Death Valley, California in July, and it's a 100-mile race, and I'm like, that's insane. Like, there's no reason. Like, I get it, you want to be tough, but like for us as airsofters, especially like the average, and we talked about this on the last podcast or on the Q&A, I think, like the average fitness of an airsofter, like heat is a real problem that can kill you, right? Like straight up, like you have to be so careful, and that's a problem that even here in St. John's in Newfoundland, where it doesn't really get that hot, but like you have a 25-degree-Celsius day, so like an 80-degree day, and you still have people who will heat cats here because we're not acclimatized to it, right? It's just it's too hot for us. So I mean, I can't imagine like trying to do anything at 100 degrees, let alone hotter than that. Like, and for 52 hours, dude. Oh, that's wild.
Those were pretty crazy games. But just to touch back to what you were saying before about kind of leveling up newer players. So that's one thing that I think the AOSC does really well is we can, and it happened to me personally. I started out just doing like a normal skirmish day. I loved it so much. I came back for 5, 6, 7 more. And then I made friends, and they were like, hey, we're going to go do this Vietnam Patrol game. It's 52 hours. You want to come? And I was like, sure. And I hated myself for doing it for a while, but it got fun. And now I do them every opportunity I can. And there's a lot of players that, they start out doing like everyday skirmish stuff. And, I love everyday skirmish stuff. It's, the best, most common part of airsoft is just playing with some friends, no big deal. And then eventually you want a bigger challenge, something more immersive, and you go try one of these, more hardcore events. It's not for everybody. But I personally suggest it because myself and a lot of other members of our community have kind of played enough to the point where they feel they're ready and they go and do it. And they have an amazing time.
Yeah, there's two things that come to mind immediately when you talk about this. The first one is that, like, I've seen players wearing patches that say stuff like "embrace the suck," and I'm like, when I hear about these 52-hour games, I'm like, bro, you don't know what suck is, clearly, because that's a different kind of pain. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But the other thing, is that expression that Rob from Gunfather Milsim introduced me to when he was on the podcast, which is that airsoft is a big tent and there's space for everybody. And really, we've, on the channel and on the podcast, and we've always encouraged players to be like, just try stuff, right? And I'm a big proponent of experiences and trying stuff. And even if it's not for you, at least you've done that. Now, whether it's a 52-hour combat patrol in the middle of May when the temperatures are 100 degrees Fahrenheit, not sure that necessarily needs to be exactly in that format, but the opportunity, and I think this is where what AOSC does sounds like a really good opportunity for people to safely try something and then make that determination whether, like you, Junah, it's for you, or maybe for like Todd, it's like, well, I'm glad that I did it because now I know that it's not for me, right? Or maybe sure, you'll be surprised and you'll be like, oh my God, I love mixing camping and airsoft and getting woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sleeping on the rocks. I mean, maybe you will like that. I don't know. I'm not mid-40s yet, but I'm getting close, and that doesn't sound awesome either. But that's just me. So
just thinking about what Junah said about leveling up players, I can think specifically about Lance from the PBC area, that he started out just showing up to those games, those skirmishes pretty consistently, and he became friends. And then like he went to Black Start with you and a couple of fellas several months ago. And so he's upgraded his abilities from playing as a just pickup player, skirmish games, to go into a national level milsim. And I've seen the pictures from that game, and I've heard a couple of stories to where y'all had a blast playing that, and that leveling up of taking a younger guy. He's what, 16, 17, I think. And
crazy proud of Lance and several other airsofters like him. I actually, when I was running Lion Claw events, and he was probably like a couple months into playing, and he was only 16 at the time. He asked me if I could sign for him as guardian so that he could go and participate in one of those Lion Claw milsims, which it's not super hardcore. It's kind of an intermediary step, but that got him to there. And then all of a sudden, he was coming to the 24-hour games and doing all kinds of crazy stuff with the rest of us. And yeah, he's like 17.
Wow. We said this before, and something we've really tried to live in our community as well, which is we need those younger players,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Oh, for sure.
middle-aged players like ourselves, like we're not going to be playing airsoft. It's, I can't imagine we'll be playing airsoft into our 70s, like certainly.
I'm gonna try.
And so we might try, and medical science may carry us into it. I might have a wheelchair, and you'll have to call me Ironsides. I don't know, but like realistically speaking, it's not like other certain sports like playing tennis or whatever. You could play a lot longer. Like there's a certain amount of physicality that is required, and so we do need those younger players to keep the communities going and stuff like that, and setting that example. And by virtue of the fact that you have this organization that represents the interests of, and not, again, not in a political way, but just that looks out basically for the player base beyond one particular field or field owner, is certainly a way that communities can build that own sort of sense of community for themselves, rather than saying, oh well, like we have here, like we only have one field, so that's our community. But if you have multiple fields, it's very easy, I can imagine, to have pockets start to create. It's like, well, these guys play here and those guys play there, and never the twain shall meet. And that's not necessarily conducive to building the kind of environment that it sounds like you've created with AOSC, right? And creating players who are 16 and 17 who are like, not related to you, that you're okay signing a guardianship for, right?
Right.
So, and I guess one of my sort of last sort of questions or points of conversation really is, if someone is listening to this, right, and listening to this podcast, and hopefully someone's listening to this podcast, but if someone is listening to this and going like, wow, this sounds like a great idea, like I'd like to set that up in my area, or I think this would be really good for us because we have multiple multiple sets of rules and multiple player bases, and it'd be really good to sort of bring that all together. How did y'all, like, how did that process start for you, and what were some of the recommendations or what are some recommendations that you would share with them?
So I actually talked to the original executive director of the AOSC, uh, for a while, just kind of getting the history and everything from it. Because I was not playing for 14 years ago, almost this September, when they sat down and created the organization. But at the time, it was, I think, it was three of the largest, most active teams in the state came together and were like, hey, we don't like this current organization. They're not providing anything for the players. Let's sit down and create our own. So that's what they did. And really the basis for the whole thing is that you've got to have somebody who can make that time investment, and they've got to have help. Not everybody needs to contribute the same amount. The executive director of our organization put a ridiculous amount of time and effort into making the organization as cohesive as it is today. And honestly, he's really the only reason Airsoft in South Carolina exists the way it does today. And that's Henry Williams. So he's really the concrete foundations for our organization. But the kind of major points he hit on when I was talking to him about how they got started and everything is that you've got to have that time commitment, and you've got to have an understanding for your player base that you like you were saying earlier, you want to cater to everybody. I personally love playing like fast-paced, almost speed soft, just as much as I play those 24-hour events. And like you have to include both player bases in, because otherwise, yeah, they're never going to touch each other. They're never going to be interested in jumping over. You're never going to get more players. There's nobody. You've got to have the younger players that get interested in playing this form of airsoft or this form of airsoft. So you definitely want to cater to both. Another thing is, again, the cohesive rule set, really important. It helps, just anybody can play at any of our fields, any of our games, and they know what the rule set's going to be, unless it's a 24-hour event, and then it's still really similar, just some mild differences. But yeah, you want to be able to level up your player base. And another big thing that he touched on was kind of as the organization progresses, you've got to maintain your community by interacting with them a ton. I love Discord. I think it's the best thing ever. Back in the day, they used forums. Airsoft was really big on forums back in the day, but it doesn't have the immediacy that Discord does, where you get a notification on your phone, and that's really helped. So Discord platform is amazing for building a community like that, where somebody comes to one of your games because they're invited from a friend, and then they're like, oh, this is awesome, when are you guys doing it next? And we either give them our website, which has a link to the Discord, or we just give them the Discord. And our Discord, I think, is currently sitting just under 800 members. So we're still porting over from Facebook, where we had about 2,000. But you've got to keep building that community, inviting people into the conversation, and treating everybody with respect. Because you get younger players, they're going to have stupid questions, but you got to let them know that it's a stupid question, but also give them the answer.
Yes.
And just continue the conversation with them. We've had a couple of outstanding players today that when they started and they joined on Facebook and Discord, they were miscreants. They were not pleasant to talk to. They were just really bullheaded and difficult. But we gave them some gentle ribbing, and we keep pressing them to come to games, because regardless of what anybody says, we want you to have fun at the games. That's the core of the sport.
Yeah.
So we kept getting them out to games, and eventually they became some of the best players we have today, just because they grew up.
Yeah, and I think to boost that a little bit, I would say they grew up in a community that you created in a particular way, with certain to use the lack of a better term, like certain values around airsoft that you think are important, right? Whether that's values around treating people with respect, and good sportsmanship, calling your hits, all this kind of stuff. And I think, just not trying to toot our own horn, but on our Discord, very much similar. Like, it's not anyone can create a Discord, and I think you have a lot of communities that have created Discords for themselves. But there's a difference between creating a Discord where people can engage, and then also, for lack of a better term, again, manicuring that community so that you're providing an experience that promotes a type of behavior that is beneficial to your community as well. And I think the notion of respect is so important, because we know on the internet, it's not necessarily a given that you create a community, people will be respectful. And once you create a space, and this is something I've noticed, and I think, Todd, maybe you can speak to this too, but once you create a space where people understand what the rules are, you don't even need moderators to moderate it. The community will self-police, will be like, hey, you know what? We don't act like that here. We don't behave like that here. Like, we don't talk about that kind of stuff here, because that's not the kind of community we have. And once you get there, like, you sort of made it, right? Like that's the hard work is done, right?
Yeah. I looked back at the AOSC rule set, not the game rules, the community rules. And they were written back in the forum days, but there are 20 different rules in there. It's multiple pages of rules of how you treat people, and what the rules are about. If there's complaints, you talk to a moderator, and just this long list of establishing the rules of how you're going to talk to people, and how you expect to be talked to, and what the rules are for every scenario, not every scenario, but the foundation for it, and outlined on what the expectations were. And it established a culture. And I think that's the key word there, is it established a culture of honesty and respect. And there are so many places where airsoft communities don't have that honesty, sportsmanship, and respect for others. I've played it out of state field several times. Several times I've said, I'm never coming back to this place. I don't like the referees. I don't like the other player base that's here. It's not my style. It's not what I want to do. I don't like how they do things. And so I've said, that isn't the case here in South Carolina with this organization. They've established a culture to where when you show up, you know what to expect. Generally, cursing's not permitted. And you can't run around saying bang, bang. These rules are established, and that is our culture. And when I came in 4 years ago, I quickly learned that's the culture. I showed up in balancer stuff in off-brand Realtree from Walmart. And I was a balancer, and I thought for sure I'd be on green. Nope, I was balancer for the day. That's fine. And I knew the next pretty quick. I needed to get green. I wanted OD green, Ranger green, so I could be on green team. Because Alpha's the best. No, it's not. Tan's the best. No, it's not.
No, it's Woodland. Woodland is the best.
Okay.
Yeah.
Woodland is actually really, really effective down here too. Just as much as it is right? in Canada. And it's just that culture, I think, is the key word there. That respect, that honesty, and sportsmanship, and the culture that they've established. Now, when you show up, you know what you're going to get, and the players know, and they can police each other. I've been at times where I've had to call my teammates hits for them because I saw him get hit, and I saw him keep shooting, and I said, stop. I saw you get hit. Oh, I didn't feel it. That's fine. You didn't feel it, but put your hand up. You're out.
Yeah.
Now sit tight. Give me 10 seconds and I'll come medic you. That's the way it is.
Yes.
Yeah. It doesn't hurt anything, but you need to stop for a few seconds because the guy that's 100 feet away, he shot you. And if you keep shooting back at him, he's going to get mad because I saw it get hit. You didn't feel it. That's fine. It happens, but you're out.
Yeah, and when you talk about culture, creating a culture where if someone taps you on your team and is like, "Hey, that hit you," you go, "Oh my God, I didn't feel it," and then and you're not upset about that. You're almost maybe grateful is probably too strong of a word. You're you're appreciative that they pointed it out to you. Obviously, you don't nobody likes getting hit, but you're still like, okay, well, I would rather know that I didn't feel it, but I did get hit and I called it than have the other guy be upset because it's like, oh, I hit that dude. Why did you not call his hits or whatever, right? Which sucks for on the other side of things too. So, and to your point, that comes down to culture and creating that community where people behave in that way, and that says a lot. When you have, I think, Junah, you used the term earlier. It's like you have guys who are miscreants, right? Who a couple of years later, and I mean, when you start playing Airsoft and you're 15 and you think you know literally everything there is to know about everything ever. And you're coming in with an attitude and all this kind of stuff. And once you simmer down as you get a little bit older, that's fair. But you can simmer down in a variety of different ways, some of which are not necessarily constructive or fitting into the community that you've tried to create. So you also have to create a space where people are okay being sort of not necessarily mentored, but at least guided a little bit and being shown hey, this is a good way to play. And not just from a behavioral standpoint, but also just a gameplay standpoint. And that's something we've tried to do as well. Showing people how to play makes them better, which then makes them tougher opponents, which then makes you better. So it's almost selfish, right? Really, when you think about it, right?
Yeah. Go ahead. One thing that I always go over in our safety briefings before games when I'm running down the rule set is it is not acceptable for our players to approach or even yell at an enemy player to tell them that they are doing something wrong. They either need to tell an admin or bring it up. The best thing to do is just tell an admin. But the other thing I tell is exactly like Todd said. I'm so glad it's getting through to somebody. Is that you police your team. You never police the enemy team. You always police your team because, if your team's playing honest, the other team's going to play honest and everybody's going to have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better.
The second you start cheating and you're cheating and you're okay with it and your teammate next to you starts cheating, the second you start doing it, it's going to be obvious. And then the other team starts doing it. And then you're mad, that they're cheating. But wait a second, you started cheating first. and it just snowballs into a disaster. So you've got to
Yeah,
police yourself. You've got to be sportsman about it.
100%. And yeah, once it starts going down that road, you really have lost the plot, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is even the sense? Like, if we're not going to call hits, if we're going to not do this, that, like, there's no sense.
I do want to mention something. Your last large question to us was what are your suggestions to promote this to the rest of the world, to the rest of the communities around?
Mm-hmm.
And Junah hit on a couple of the things that I thought of, which are it takes a big commitment. It takes some leadership. It takes leadership of teams, if you will, from a variety of players to be on board with this thing starting. But how do you start it at the grassroots? Is it just takes one person. Mr. Williams did this for us, and he wasn't even 20 at the time, I think. I mean, he was young when it started, and he took charge of it and said, this is what we want to do. And super smart guy, but he took the time to put together the rule set and to say, this is what we want to use. And it took some time for that to grow, for that to be established. But you develop your rule set, you develop your media platform, if you will, from your own Discord. And, if it's Airsoft Organization of Florida or Florida Airsoft Group or whatever you want to call it, and Florida starts their own group. And once you have your good rule set and you've got a following, you can show up to a field and say, hey, this is our rule set. We want to play here. Can we have this Saturday in 6 weeks? All you got to do is rent us the field. We'll show up with 35 players, and you can get all the money. You can get 90% of the money. We just need a little bit of money for our props and our gas. And all you get, just give us the space. And you show up with that. Maybe that works to where you can say, we bring our admins, we bring the players, we bring, a water. We can't bring a porta potty, but there's trees, right?
Yep.
If you can show up with those things and just say, hey, field owner, can we have this space? Can we use this space? There's nothing for you to do except collect the money and stay out of the way. That's a pretty enticing argument to a business owner to say, wait, you're just going to pay me to be here and I don't have to do anything? It's fine with me. Let's do it.
Yeah. And I mean, if you pitch it to them, the worst they can say is no, right? If you don't ask, the answer is definitely no. But if maybe they'll be yes. And to your point, I think, Todd, like if you give them a turnkey solution, and that's sort of what we did with our local field. We're like, hey, we're not asking you for any money. We just want to run a game. You get to keep all the money. You don't need to do anything, but let us show up and just block the field. And they were like, that sounds like free money to me. Okay. Right. Like, I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer if you're a business owner, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Big thanks, Todd, for bringing that up. That's a very important point. And we're very open about it. Unless the field is charging us more, it's $15 a head, and then we take 5. So it's $20 a person, unless it's a big multi-day game or something like that. And then we have to charge more. But I mean, that's the breaks on it. We take 5 and the field gets 15. And that, or the equivalent in Canada, I'm sure is very appealing to a lot of property owners that are just sitting on nothing.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
One thing real quick, I just want to say, if anybody from Canada wants to come down to one of our games, if you guys buy the plane tickets, you get in for free. I'll comp your field fee. Just
sounds good. We'll need the replicas too, because we can't travel with those across the border.
Yeah. Hey,
to be fair, we can come to you. We can't get home with them. That's the problem.
Has plenty. He's got really cool guns. Really, I'm jealous.
Yeah, well,
you would be jealous.
I will let you know if and when. Well, we're definitely traveling to Georgia in Q1 of 2024 for Iron Horse. I don't think I'll make it to South Carolina that time, but I definitely, there's so much airsoft to see around the world, and in particular, there's so much airsoft in the United States.
Oh yeah,
that is really, really appealing. And when I hear about organizations like yours that are creating these amazing communities, because that's really, for me, like I've played a lot of airsoft. And the thing that keeps me coming back isn't the fact that I'm playing at the same field that I played at for the last 10 years on the exact same terrain with the mostly exact same ranges at the exact same fire lanes. That's not what keeps me coming back. It's the community, it's the people who are playing with, it's the type of games. And that to me is really important. And so when I hear about communities where you have these players helping players, creating rule sets that keep people engaged and fun and safe. That hits a lot of rings a lot of bells for me. And like, yeah, that's a place I definitely would like to check out. I think you've got something really good going with AOSC. And for anyone who's listening, this is this is something that they've set up, but they've worked for it. And there's an expression that I really that I've been using for a lot of different things, but it basically comes down to you can't do all the good that your airsoft community needs, but your airsoft community needs all the good that you can do. And I think that you can see that in the AOSC mentality, right? It's one person starting and doing as much as they can, recognizing that they're going to need help at some point, but just putting in as much work as they can, and then other people recognizing that effort and going, yeah, I like that, I'm going to join, and so on and so forth. And if that can happen in South Carolina, I'm sure that can happen in provinces in France and other places in Germany. Like, there's no reason that this type of model can't work elsewhere. So I'm very, very grateful for both of you to coming on and sharing your experiences. And this setup, which I think is just phenomenal. So thank you both very much.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Glad to contribute to the greater good of the communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, that's all we've got for you this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to talk to Todd or Junah, you can join us on the Discord. The link is in the description. But until then, that's all we've got for you. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.